Thanks for acknowledging all of us are part of smart people. Of course, that's a joke. First of all, right after the very inspiring speech by Honorable Kassid, which already designates several important work we have to do in this session about how the think tank can contribute to, especially on how to incorporate democratization and value element into our southbound policy and the Yushan Forum cooperations. And here today we are talking we are gathering several very leading intellectuals as well as the leading think tanks in the Asia Pacific that we have, and we are honored to have all of them to be able to present here and to give us their thoughts. The title for building intellectual capital through think tank cooperation and collaboration in Asia. What we wanted to do is that, first of all, when we look at the traditional think tank cooperations, in terms of the issues, it has been very much focused on the political or security issue that's very common among many of the think tank enterprises. That we have a lot of track 1, track 2 dialogue, track 1.5, so the officials through the think tank, they are able to engage with each other. So basically that's part of the governmental policy works. But on the other hand, we also noticed that there are several other issues where the social, cultural, and basically it's a lot of soft power issues that, to a certain extent, not directly related to governmental policy, but that is also very crucial for the Asia Pacific or Asia Pacific and Indian Oceans for the integrations, especially those issues. They are critical for other areas of the political economic cooperation project to be able to be successful. And we believe that the think tank needs to really focus on this area. So we'd like to explore how the intellectual capital through the think tank cooperation could contribute in this regard. Another thing we would also like to focus is that when we talk about the think tank cooperation, are there any formality or the kind of the formulations that there are various forums that have started to pop up in the Asia Pacific and Indian Oceans. We have the Resina Dialogue, we have the Shangri-La Dialogue, we have even the Korea and Japan, they have the defense dialogue and others, also among the Malaysia and Indonesia's. If those different dialogue and the forum, we're able to sort of the division labors, work on each very different issues, but focus on those exclusively, or form a certain kind of cooperations that would that be able to help together or to pool all the talents in Asia Pacific for the work we wanted to do together? Would that be a good idea or explorations? So basically, I just throw that out for people to think about. So here we are very honored to have the distinguished panel here. Let me introduce all of them. First, on my right-hand side, is Ambassador Darren Michel. Ambassador Darren Michel, Darren Michel, I will say that he's a half Taiwanese. Yeah, the son-in-law for Taiwan, in my view. And of course, he has been working in Taiwan and serving as a U.S. ambassador to Myanmar. So I think he's a wonderful person to talk about the U.S. Taiwan and also with our South and southbound target states, the cooperation and aspects. And then on my left-hand side is Dr. Ralf Emmers. He's Associate Dean for the RSIS in Singapore. And we all know that RSI is the leading think tanks in Asia Pacific for the regional issues. So we are really honored to have Dr. Ralf Emmers to be here with us. And then second on my right is Mr. Sunjoy Joshi. Now he is the chairman and the director of the ORF India, Observer Research Foundation India. We all know that every January, ORIF has one of the very distinguished platform that's called Resina Dialogue. And also, according to the president and the organizers for the Yushan Forum, Resina Dialogue is a part of the inspiration for the Yushan Forum. So we are really glad to have the organizer of the Resina Dialogue to be here with us. And then second on my left is Dr. Minh Paing from Myanmar. And I also know him that he's part of my Cornell alumni. So we share a lot of interesting story about how our life in Ithaca is, including the famous suicide bridge, which he just lived just nearby there. And the third on my right is Miss Dr. Nuke Pudjiastuti from the Indonesia. We call it LIPI. That's a leading development think tank in Indonesia. So we're really glad to have you here, and we'd like to hear more of your thoughts regarding how the think tank cooperation in here we can do. And then third on my left is Dr. Christy Xu. She's the director of the Taiwan ASEAN Study Centers in Zhonghua Institute of Economic Research. She's basically our ASEAN economic or South Asia economic person, the go-to person in Taiwan. We know she's extremely busy, so we are really glad that she'll be able to make the presence here. And then the last one on the right is also a good friend of mine, personal good friend of mine, Dr. Chen Mumin. He is Taiwan's leading expert in South Asia, and not just limited to India. We know that he already thanked himself as Taiwan's India experts, but now he extends his research footprints to Nepal, to Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and visit there several times. So I think to have him here really broaden our visions. And then the last one, but not the least, is actually probably next year he will be the main architect for the Yushan Forum, Dr. Alan Yang Ha, sorry. That he's the executive director for the Center of South Asian Study in National Zhenjiang University. Actually, he is also part of the architects for all the Yushan Forum. So thank you, Yang Ha, for making your presence here. All right. So without further ado, I would just like to ask half Taiwanese, Derek, for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, I-chung. First of all, I want to congratulate the Prospect Foundation for an outstanding two-day conference. I-chung, I think it was yesterday, they said you did all the dirty work. So I don't know exactly what that meant, but congratulations on all the dirty work that you did to make this happen as well. The reason why he calls me half Taiwanese is not just because I come here often, but I'm married to a woman from Taiwan. So I'm called a son-in-law of Taiwan, and I take that as a very much a point of pride. The new southbound policy is not technically involving the United States, but I've been asked to speak on this panel, and I think maybe in some ways to talk about the framework of think tanks. In part because the United States has a very strong think tank culture. I came from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, many of you may know. I worked with them before I went into government in the Obama administration back in 2009. I was with CSIS for 8 years. Before that, I also worked at an NGO called the National Democratic Institute, which did a lot of work on democracy in Asia. And in fact, I worked here 30 years ago. I worked for the Yingwen Zhongguo Youbao, the China Post. So in some ways, I suppose I can see various sides to this question of new southbound policy, from the think tank side, but also how it affects government and NGOs. And so as a human being, though, when I look at this policy, I look first, not just as a son-in-law of Taiwan, but as a human being, seeing, as basically it was been talked about, Taiwan is a success story. Taiwan exists. There are 23 million people that have achieved something remarkable here, that Kun Kasit talked about over lunch, but that it really needs to be recognized, and we don't have a person to waste in the world, and certainly there are people here who can contribute. So as an American, but just as a human being, we need to ensure that the people of Taiwan have an ability to get out and help this dynamic Asia-Pacific region succeed. And you do it in a responsible way, and it's what we need right now. As a think tanker, though, I think of it in terms of geopolitics, too, in the sense people say, well, this must be about China. And it's sort of the word that we don't hear much, in the past few days, the China factor is mentioned a little bit. China has made this about itself, probably, and it will be a constraint on Taiwan and those who represent Taiwan. But this is not about China. This is about Taiwan. This is about human beings contributing and giving examples of their success. But it also, someone who worked in the Obama administration, there was what we call the pivot to Asia. But people don't realize the pivot was not just to Asia, but within Asia. We pivoted not just to Asia, but from Northeast Asia to Southeast Asia and to South Asia, to India, because there was a simple recognition that the region of South and Southeast Asia was dynamic and very important to engage. Japan has done the same thing. Korea has done the same thing. So of course, Taiwan should be thinking in similar terms. So simply in terms of interest of the 23 million people here, that you want to diversify your relationships and you diversify within your region to an area of great dynamism. It is a very smart and a strategic policy, I think, in terms of just simply Taiwan's national interest and not anything that should be thought of as a challenge to any third country, even though they will make it about themselves. They, of course, will then pursue power politics to face your people politics, and I happen to think people politics has a great power to it, and I really encourage continuation. Now, think tanks are essentially intellectual NGOs. We talk about intellectualism or intellectual, sometimes they're gongos, government-organized NGOs. But they do certain things that I think are very beneficial to this whole program. Think tanks can introduce certain ideas. Number one, why should Taiwan be part of a conversation in Southeast and South Asia? Think tanks provide sort of the intellectual capital. They're ones who think about how they bridge government and society, governments and elites. They have credibility because oftentimes they come from government or they've been close to government, they have experience. So they're very important to tap into for the intellectual underpinning of why Taiwan should matter, why Taiwan is important to national development, and not just simply as a geopolitical matter, but as a very practical matter. They can provide, as NGOs are, they can be navigators within countries. They can help guide Taiwan to think about where there are opportunities, where there are places of interest within a country that Taiwan should be taking advantage of. They convene. They bring folks together, different segments of society. NGOs talked about bringing NGOs and businesses together. Think tanks can do that as well. They can provide platforms for conversations that need to be had in the national interest, where there are not. They fill the gaps of thinking. They look at things fresh. It's what I enjoyed about being part of CSIS. You look around Asia and you say, what is it that governments or our nations are not thinking about? Where is there creative new thinking that may be possible? And I think tapping into them is very important for that strategic thinking to make Taiwan part of the conversation. And in the extension of that is promoting policy ideas that extend from that strategy. And they also, I think, promote greater understanding and knowledge about Taiwan. They do that for every country, and I think it's important to promote what's happening. It's oftentimes overlooked in this corner of Asia. What is actually happening, what's the history, what's the context, and assisting, I think, not just the executive branch, but the legislative branch, NGOs, and business of a country. Think tanks are very important in that. In the United States, there is really not a think tank in Washington that doesn't have a component that looks at Taiwan. And it's absolutely essential because those who are interested in North Korea, or interested in China, they have a natural constituency. And it is very easy for Taiwan to be lost in that mix, just be frank, because of the sovereignty, the political questions. So think tanks can put this on the agenda, and in the United States, think tanks play an absolutely essential role to keep it part of the conversation. I should say at CSIS, I'm not with them anymore, but I'm working with them on a project looking at new southbound policy, where they will discuss this in Washington, put it on the agenda, and then there'll be recommendations for U.S. government action. This is not well understood in Washington. You would think Washington would know about this policy. There's a lot of talk about it in Taiwan, but in Washington there's not. And I think think tanks should be used as platforms to discuss basically what's been done here should be done at local levels in each one of the countries that are represented here. So quickly, because I don't want to go on too long, recommendations for action. I've gone through some of these already. I think one is to identify the Asianists, those who are focused on the region, and cultivate and create Taiwan watchers, folks who are interested in Taiwan in each of these countries, to tap into and to be centers for learning and educating people in the executive branch, but society writ large on what is happening in Taiwan and specifically about this policy. Then I think it's important to promote a network of these Taiwan watchers throughout this region. There's something called China Pol, where the Chinese folks who follow China all can get together on social media and exchange information, maybe a Taiwan social media network. The language issue can be a challenge, but ensuring that there's conversations about Taiwan among those who are interested in the region. As I say, use those think tank allies as advisors and guides to navigate and to shape and share ideas, and maybe do national versions of these conferences, and have think tanks as platforms. And then finally, what is very important, and I think something for the United States and Japan to take on, we should assist actively. Taiwan does not have a lot of assets, does not have a lot of diplomatic assets in the region because of their size and because of the politics of Taiwan. The United States and Japan, I believe, have a really fundamental interest that the new southbound policy succeed. I would hope that there'd be more discussion within the United States and Japan on the policy, and then discussing why it's in our interest to help Taiwan with this, and that each embassy in the region is tasked to send back a cable and say, how can we help Taiwan? What can we do to leverage the assets that we have in Indonesia or in Vietnam or in Myanmar or in India, where we can help Taiwan with this policy so that Taiwan is not simply on its own. We do have common interests, we do have common values. I think those should be promoted. It doesn't need to be high profile, it can be discreet. It could be sensitive to the sensitivities of these countries. But I think it is fundamentally in the U.S. interest to give the Taiwan people dignity, and that we put the sensitive issues aside so we can ensure benefit for the region of what Taiwan has to offer. So that's what I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek, especially last point that our new southbound policy for it to be successful, I think is critically that our friends, the U.S. and Japan alike, could assist us. Of course, India as well. And then next, I will ask Ralf Emmers to give us some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the organizers. It's always a pleasure to come to Taipei and to participate in such wonderful forums. Now, what I'll try to do in my 7 minutes allocated to me is to try to address 3 issues. First, I would like to say a few words about the evolving role of think tanks in Asia. Secondly, I would like to talk about the experience of my own graduate school and think tank RSIS, and finally conclude with some concluding remarks on how think tanks can shape policy debates in Asia. So, the role of think tanks. So, as mentioned by Ambassador Mitchell, we of course have a very strong tradition, think tank tradition in various Western countries. You travel to DC, London, Brussels, Geneva. There's a very vibrant think tank community. But what I would like to stress, however, is that you also now have a clear and prominent role of think tanks in this part of the world. I mean, I've been based in Singapore for about 16 years now. And we have seen the evolution of the role of think tanks in recent 2 decades predominantly. And increasingly, think tanks can now influence the process of policy making, not just nationally, but also regionally. And this is done, of course, predominantly through what we call track 2 diplomacy. Track 2 diplomacy is when you bring in academics, experts, former civil servants who are there in their private capacity to try to address very specific sets of issues. Very often you're dealing with functional problems or also with very sensitive issues that cannot be addressed at the track 1 level. And this is where think tanks provide a networking opportunity and a gathering opportunity for all those people to try to come up with new ideas. I think a second major transformation that we've seen in recent years is that think tankers are no longer there purely as policy defenders. That used to be the tradition, especially in this part of the world. If you were a think tanker from a particular country, you were there basically as a spokesperson for any kind of official positions adopted by your government. I'm glad to say that that's no longer the case. It might be the case in some particular countries, but overall, I think think tankers are now perceived to be policy catalysts. They are there to generate new ideas. Most of them will die rather quickly, but some of those ideas may actually be picked up by policymakers. And finally, a third transformation that we've seen in terms of the evolution of think tanks in Asia is, of course, the audience. We are no longer just targeting governments. If anything, we are really now focusing increasingly on civil society. So the NGO session that was held before lunch, I think, is extremely relevant in the world of the think tanks. You need to have the NGOs on board nowadays. But also, of course, you need to address media, social media, much more actively as well. So the audience has also grown significantly. Now, let me say a few words about the RSIS experience, because I would like to think that we are a little bit unique in the region, because we are both a graduate school of international affairs as well as a think tank. So from the very beginning, we try to combine the two missions. We are there both to educate future leaders, but also to provide think tank activities across political, security, and economic issues. And we are big. We have about 200 people working full-time at RSIS across a very wide range of topics, going from the very traditional security issues all the way to climate change. So what kind of strategies do we adopt as a think tank? And here again, I would like to highlight three. First of all, you need to be knowledge-based. And this means recruiting staff from very different backgrounds. Look at me, I'm originally Belgian. I'm a permanent resident of Singapore, but I'm not a Singaporean, and I am the associate dean of the school. So you must be able to attract people internationally, academics, former policymakers, visiting researchers, to try to have this international conversation within your think tank. Secondly, you must be open to exchanging ideas. The point is not to be polite. The point is to have a real brewery of ideas going on, both on the regional and global issues. Finally, there is this element of networking. A think tank that does not communicate with others is pretty useless. So you must, as much as possible, to try to be part of networks, track 2 networks, but also increasingly talk to the business community, research foundations, and others. Now, I would like to give you a very concrete example of how a think tank like ours, like mine, can actually make a difference. And I was personally involved in this study. Towards the late, around 2012, the ASEAN Regional Forum, which is the main security forum in the region, was stuck on the issue of preventive diplomacy. It was impossible for them to come up with a working definition due to politics across members. So they decided to reach out to two think tanks, CSIS and RSIS, to kind of work together on trying to look at best practices outside of the Asia Pacific. So we conducted a very broad study and try to come up with the best ideas that other regional bodies had developed to try to promote preventive diplomacy in their own region. And ultimately, the study was deeply welcomed by the participating countries. We ended up being invited to present the idea to the foreign ministers. And this, of course, begs the question, well, why did we succeed where clearly the policymakers were stuck? First and foremost, we had a strong background in ASEAN affairs. We had contacts in most ministries in Southeast Asian countries, and we were therefore able to kind of bring together some of their thoughts. We also had a good network outside of the region. So we traveled to various parts of the world to try to understand how those bodies were doing preventive diplomacy. And finally, we were viewed as non-controversial. And that's the beauty of a think tank. We are not, I wouldn't say we are apolitical, but we are trying as much as possible to push forward some ideas without having a very strong particular national agenda. So let me finish, because I really want to stick to my allocated time, by highlighting what think tanks should focus on. What are some of the core objectives? And here I think there are basically four. First and foremost, you must come up with doable policy proposals. It makes no sense to be living in Wala Land, to highlight a movie that won the Oscars last year. You have to be living in the real world. You must be coming up with ideas that are doable as well as relevant. Secondly, and that's much harder, you need to come up and get the attention of policymakers. So you must constantly build up that network so that you can actually reach them in key moments. But again, you should not stop at policymakers. You must embark on a wider public debates. And I think this is where social media is so important. You must go digital. If you're not digital today in the think tank world, then clearly you're not going to have much impact. And finally, your ideas should have a medium to long-term shelf life. Coming up with the most brilliant idea, but one which is only relevant up until Christmas, will make no difference whatsoever. So combining those four, coming up with new ideas, you must be a brewery of ideas, getting the attention of policymakers, but then also going beyond policymakers and trying to influence wider public debates through op-eds, websites, social media. And finally, demonstrating that your ideas are there for the long term and not just for the short term. And on that end, I'll end. Thank you.
Yeah, thank Ralf. You are really on time, and especially your last 5 suggestions about how to run a think tank, how to make things relevant. I think that's very valuable. So next, I will invite Dr. Sunjoy Joshi for the remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lai, both for this invite to the Yushan Forum, as well as the kind words you had to say about the Raisina dialogue. We are also learning, like all of us, in the business of learning how to operationalize think tanks, especially in very challenging environments in Asia, which are very different from, say, the United States of America, which has had a huge tradition of think tanks. We have had 2 excellent presentations, both by Derek and Ralf, which have kind of laid the foundation for this discussion. I will actually take off from the excellent speech we heard from Honorable Aum Seok-hyun in the afternoon today over lunch, where he spoke about the role of technology. And I'm going to be talking about how this art and craft and science of surviving in this hyper-connected and hyper-communicative age. And that is a big challenge which think tanks like us all face. Ralf spoke about the need for the digital media and how important the digital media has become for us. So on the one hand, you have new Twitter-happy politicians shooting off tweets every morning like they were 6 shooters in the Wild West. So you have that kind of a atmosphere where you're trying to react to things which are happening on a day-to-day basis. And on the other hand, you are faced with a situation where the average attention span of the users who are going to be accessing whatever information you provide is on handheld devices. The attention span is not going to be more than 6 seconds of video or about 140 characters of text. That is what you're limited to. So, and if your download speeds, Korea has great download speeds, but if your download speeds are more than a fraction of a nanosecond, whatever pearls of wisdom you have are lost forever. So no one is going to be having a look at them. So how does one find elbow room in this kind of space, a very crowded space, which we have created? That is becoming a big challenge, increasingly for think tanks. But on the positive side, there is, it has actually never been easier, perhaps to find common interests, to build connections, propagate ideas, and create communities. I mean, the Islamic State does it very well, they do it all the time. But that is something which we all need to get into, we all need to learn and create these larger narratives, which it is all about creating the right narratives which take the stories, whether it be of democracy, whether it be of the liberal world order, whether it be of open societies, they need to be taken forward. Now, specifically talking about Asia, to create knowledge systems, countries need human resources with the capacity to produce knowledge, and whether you call it an accident of history or whatever, or misfortune of history, today, most of the countries which need most to discover the solutions, whether it be the SDGs, whether it be the whole question of inclusion, generating employment, these are the countries which are also the most constrained as far as human capital goes. A, creating the human capital. Secondly, retaining the human capital they create. Because a lot of it, anyway, the good quality will get exported. And second, which flows from the first, which is the challenge of human capital. See, most knowledge systems in the last few centuries in the Western world have been built, around, they've had the advantage of becoming very well integrated systems with national budgets, linked to national laboratories, military industrial complexes, foreign policy establishments. So there's a whole network which has created, breathed life into these, these large think tanks. Countries in the global south find that either the governments did not have the wherewithal to invest in all of this, so think tanks have been slow to take off in many Asian countries. So think tanks either end up being government supported or otherwise struggle to raise money and find funds outside government systems. But there are ideas today whereby, yes, you can, maybe through crowdsourcing and other sources, raise funds. We have been experimenting. Observer Research Foundation is an organization which does not survive on government funds. We are a completely independent organization. And one advantage is that technology has placed outreach in the hands of everybody, in the hands of individuals, in the hands of organizations. So sheer size and resources alone no longer have the monopoly of advantage. So that is one big change which has happened. And I would say that often rigid, old, structured organizations, which operate in silos, in the silos of disciplines, are finding themselves more and more at a disadvantage. That is actually true today of all mainframe establishments, whether you talk of governments, whether you talk of ministries, whether you talk of agencies, and whether you talk of think tanks and universities. So that is a challenge which is being faced by all. Because old traditional organizations, including corporations, including businesses, which are structured differently, are finding it very difficult to respond in this new age. And it is like my favorite images which I use from Star Trek is my favorite serial. When you start moving at warp speed, then you can't build your spaceships out of old traditional materials. You have to build new structures. You have to find new materials. You have to find new ways of doing things. So the advantage which we have today is that, first of all, the boundaries between institutions are blurring. That's a very important thing. The boundaries between organizations are blurring. People today work across organizations. People today learn to work across disciplines. Now, aggregation of people coming together is no longer limited just by geography. No, they can come together across geography, they can come together across disciplines, and it is those organizations, even small organizations, which make the most of these opportunities that are going to go the furthest. And the typical example I gave is, the new organization, the new structure when you talk of, which is the biggest hotel company in the world? Airbnb. It does not own a single hotel. Which is the biggest taxi company in the world? Uber, without owning a single taxi. Now, do the Uber and B&B models, can they work in think tanks? Can we start working? And this is something when you spoke of the Rajaratnam dialogue. This is something which we are trying to do through forums like this, precisely through forums like the Yushan forum or the forum like the Rajaratnam dialogue, create within the forum platforms, opportunities where completely diverse organizations can come together and seize new ideas. Because this is the new wave of exponential knowledge creation. It's going to be very, very different. And we need to be moving into this completely new architecture of platforms, this new architecture of interacting and reacting with each other, which is going to be extremely important. So how do we position the power of technology? And that is what we were discussing also in the morning. How do we harness this power? Because we know that the fourth industrial revolution, it can either be the one which throws people out of jobs, automation, everything else takes over, that's the big fear. But on the other hand, it can also provide the opportunity where the potential of the marginalized, whether they're marginalized by gender, by birth, by location, all the non-included can really come into their own. This is an important thing because of the disruption which is happening in business structures, business organizations, even the very concept of governments and countries. So think tanks become important. Today the conversations which happen amongst tech companies, amongst the millennials and policymakers are completely dissonant. They do not understand each other. Policy is always in the game of trying to play catch up. Now we try to create forums, we must try to create forums where these conversations take place. And this is happening not just in Asia. This is also happening in developed countries. There is a huge gap between what is happening in the world of technology, what is happening in the world of policy. And countries like Taiwan become very important because yes, you are the leaders. You are at the apex, the front end of technology creation. At the same time, you have very valuable lessons to teach the world in what light-handed regulation can achieve. Most often what we find is that progress, and which is very, very critical to moving forward to development, is often stalled in countries by policymakers who do not understand the full implications. So policy has to be ultimately technology neutral. And it is light-handed policy regulation which needs to come into play. So these are important conversations which have to happen amongst think tanks, amongst policymakers, amongst technology providers. And this is, I think, how we can go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Joshi. Yeah, and I think not only you mentioned about the historical, the think tank development has to be put in the historical context. Especially among I would say the new emerging countries in Asia, where the think tank culture just recently evolved, but there are also some historical constraints that when we grow up that we have to face. But on the other hand, you also talk about how technology has potential that will shape the management and running of the think tank, and also basically shape the way that how the public knowledge as well as the debate will be formed. I think that's a very important reminders for the think tank as an enterprise when we are considering running about it. So the next, I would like to invite my colleague from Cornell, and Dr. Paing from Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the Prosper Foundation and the chairman of the panel for this opportunity to engage in the dialogue. And a chance to reminisce about the College Town bagel, which is apparently one of the best bagel in the universe, according to some. That's right. So the topic that I'll be discussing is a think tanking experience in Myanmar. And so before going to talk about the think tanks, let me start with the politics, because think tanks are born and grow and die in a specific historical and political context. And so what is the political landscape in Myanmar? We have from 88 to 2010, if we want to go back, 1962 to 2010, we have a variety of military governments. In 2011 and 12, there was a process of partial political liberalization. The general shed their uniform. As you can see, the former president in his former glory as a general and his later glory as the president of the country. So we have this semi-civilian government in 2011 and 12. In 2012, there was a by-election that permits the opposition party to contest in this small number of seats, and they won majority of seats in the 2012 election. In 2015, there was a November election, and the opposition party, National League for Democracy, won 80% of the contested seat in both houses. So new government was sworn in April 1st, 2016. So the new government is really, one of the top priorities is this national reconciliation. So if you look at the structure of the government, the executive branch, there's 18 cabinet members, and the three of the ministry are reserved for the military: the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Border Affairs. The USDP, the former ruling party, which is a sort of a coterie of former general, Union Solidarity and Development parties. There's two members: the Ministry of Religious and Cultural Affairs and Ministry of Labor. So NLD, the winning party, only took 6 seats, 6 cabinet members. Then also the ethnic representative were, one of the member of the ethnic group was given the portfolio of the Ministry of Ethnic Affairs, and there's also independent expert from various backgrounds. I think that's been in the news for some reason in the past few months. So the military is still playing a prominent role in the post-2015 government. The military sponsored the drafting of 2008 Constitution, and by the virtue or the power vested by the Constitution, the role of the military is enshrined. So if you look at the National Defense and Security Council, which is established by the Constitution, so give the military a discretionary power to declare martial laws and disband the parliament and essentially re-establish the military government. So if you look at the membership, the military control 6 seats out of 11 seats in the council. And if you also look at the legislative branch, the military control 25% of the both upper and lower houses. So these seats are reserved for the army. Army can nominate officials to sit in the parliament. So another thing to notice is the militarization of the bureaucracy. So the country has a long and proud tradition of bringing military officer and retired military officer to the line ministry at various levels. So this tradition was once again honored just prior to the democratic election in 2015. So there's a number of so-called ribbon movement. There was one in Black Ribbon Movement, which is the opposition of the government official from the Ministry of Health to the appointment of 14 military officers to senior position in the ministry. So there's also Yellow Ribbon Movement, which is appointment of 20 retired military officers to senior position in the Supreme Court. The similar ribbon movement in other ministries. So this militarization is quite ubiquitous across all ministries. Just before the election, there was a heavy parachute of military officers into the military, or into the ministry. So this is a picture of the Yangon Institute of Medicine. So the protest is say no to militarization of the Ministry of Health by doctors and medical students. So, as I was saying, 2015 there was an election, and with the motto of "time to change" and vote NLD. So there was As I was saying, NLD won the election, and these are the new economic policy from the new government, which is focused on macroeconomic stability. I think also innovation and creativity is one of the maybe a newly introduced economic policy in the government policy arena. I think one of the most relevant issues for this discussion is the identification and sort of exploitation of the changing business environment in ASEAN beyond, which is sort of a focus on regional and global integration. So if you look at the four primary objectives of national economic policy, I think the first objective is political objective, which is national reconciliation and emergence of union, federal democratic union. So economic policy should support national reconciliation and the emergence of the democratic government. And second is to achieve even economic growth across state or region, and also focus on building a new generation and the participation of all citizens, or innovation of all citizens for the economic growth. So let me go into the history of think tanks in the country. The first generation, so-called first generation think tanks, is, I think, one of the most well-known think tanks in the country is called Myanmar Development Resource Institute, MDRI, that was established under the last government. There were three centers within this institute: Center for Economic and Social Development, Center for Strategic and International Studies, and Center for Legal Affairs. The formation of this think tank is conceived by the President's Chief Economic Advisor, U Myint. In 2011, in a workshop on poverty reduction, he sort of conceived this idea that we should establish a think tank, the government should establish a think tank to support economic and social reform. So he was the leader of this, the chief of the MDRI, and then both of the center were also led by the chief advisor to the president in terms of politics and legal affairs. So what did this think tank do in terms of policy space? This is a non-government think tank NGO, registered as an NGO, but intimately linked to the president's office. So headquarters in Yangon and branches in Naypyidaw. And they'll play a critical role in two things. One is a drafting of framework of social and economic reform, FESR, and also the extractive industry transparency initiative. So think tanking out of the transition after the democratically elected government. So this is a think tank that I'm working at, the Myanmar Development Institute. It's just the first government think tank established with the cabinet ratification in 2017. So the think tank is very young, as our democracy is very young. It's only 6 months old. So our structure is, we have a governing body, a central board of director with economic-related government officials, union minister for plan and finance, commerce, permanent secretary for different economic-related ministries, representative from Peace Commission, other think tanks, and Myanmar Statistical Association. So what are the current activities of the think tank? We're focusing on strengthening the analytical capacity of the new government economic policy making. So one of the areas that we're working on is the establishment of public investment program, prioritization and selection of public investment project for the government. Second is reform of standard operation procedure at the Ministry of Plan and Finance. So government bureaucracy has been quite well known for long and protracted procedures. So we're trying to come up with a standardized approach to operating procedure within the government. Third one is a reform of state-owned enterprises. They're a major source of revenue loss for the government. So another issues that we're working on is evaluation and monitoring of national project. So we have a very weak and undeveloped monitoring evaluation system within the government for a national project. So I think one of the supporting role that the think tank is playing is the evaluation capacity within the government. As we were saying, the think tanks are sort of policy capitalists, and we need to have a commerce of ideas to have a capitalism grow. So the way in which this commerce is taking place is through seminar, workshop, and training, a collaborative research project, and we have visiting fellow research fellow from various global institutions, academic think tanks from around the world. For example, so we're a partnership with the Korean Development Institute, KDI, and we're working with the International Growth Center from London School of Economics on the project evaluation. We just had a Milken Institute financial banking roundtable, and we have visitors and a trainer from University of British Columbia, Thomas at Medicine School, visiting fellow from UPenn and University of Southern California. So what's the think tank landscape like in the post-democratic government? There's a proliferation of think tanks, not just the government think tanks, there's also non-government think tanks which are very strong. So there's the Renaissance Institute, which is strong linked to the NLD Economic Committee. Then now the National Coordinator for EITI, they're working on fiscal reform, property tax, state-owned enterprises, and sub-national budgeting. There's also a National Institute for Strategic International Studies, which is primarily working on foreign policy and international relation issues. I'm moving fast. So this, one of the interesting dynamics or dimension of a think tank is this reverse migration, reverse brain drain back from exile movement into the think tank space. So Center for Economic and Social Development, which is the continuation of MDRI from the last government, there are two prominent economists, Dr. Zhou and Wu, who were student exile, studied in the US and came back. Selwyn Institute, who were led by the Stalkerby, who used to be the mission director for University of Maryland, the Institute for Study and Policy, who is a PhD student at Berkeley, and Myanmar Institute of Peace and Security Studies. She's a PhD student in Scotland, I think. So there's a lot of reverse brain drain that's supporting the formation of think tanks. Oh, sorry. So what is the role of think tanks in the country in the sort of a democratic transition process? First, this is human capital formation and democratic values building in the civil society and the public sector. So there's a lot of capacity building and training program within the government, also outside the government. And there's a lot of public seminars, workshop, and policy brief dialogue conducted by these various think tanks on issues of multi-ethnic community, peace building, financial literacy, on a wide variety of subjects. So I think these think tanks are important for also peace building, which is our first primary objective of the economic policy and consolidation of democratic transition. Challenges, I think, because of the legacy from the decades of military autocracy, the evidence-based policymaking is still at its infancy. Statistics were usually manufactured to glorify the regime and the people in power. So now we're trying to move on to more database, evidence-based policymaking. The monitoring evaluation culture is still also at a very formative stage. The government is still working to build this accountability and transparency to the public. There's a lot of resistance and rigidity within the public sector to reform. As you know, as I was building up to the beginning, there's a lot of deeply entrenched interest within the government and the private sector. Also the climate of opinions, we need to, so democratic values are very fragile and also takes a lot of time and effort and resources and discussion and debate to build them. So I think we need to foster the culture of dissent and the deliberate democracy to grow within this the space of think tanks and out onto the whole larger community. One of the issues is the scarcity of human capital for think tanks, a researcher. Given that we have a sort of a limited exposure to ideas outside and decades of self-imposed isolation, this human capital formation, the stock of human capital is very limited in the country, so it's difficult to attract human capital for think tanks. So let me finish with a quote from State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi. This democratic process is not it's a game of chess. Sometimes it takes a long time to play this game, and sometimes you lose, sometimes you take a few steps back. And so on this note, I think it would be important, on my conclusion is we're still a very young democracy, under a long shadow of autocratic government and autocratic practices. So I think it's important for us to grow out of this tradition and this institution. And our economies also need to diversify away from dependency on the natural resources and dependency on a few markets. So southbound policy or international community can really help in sort of consolidating our, or helping our struggle for democracy or strengthen our democratic institution. And also sort of promote economic prosperities and deepen social development through connectivity of ideas, people, and institutions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mien Pei Hen. When your earlier speaker, Dr. Joshi, just talked about the constraints about the emerging countries in Asia, about forming a think tank, and you are just giving us very much the examples of how the infancy of the think tank in Myanmar developed, and the kind of constraint and the challenge you want to conquer. So it is a very vivid reminder for us, and thank you very much. So next, I would like to invite Dr. Nuke Pudjiastuti. I hope I did not mistaken, from LIPI, Indonesia, and please share with us about your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. Actually, a bit panicked because everyone can talk very fast. So I hope I can talk fast also, but not really fast. Yes, first of all, I would like to take opportunity that's it's a very wonderful, great, excellence that Prospect Foundations make this forum. Thank you very much that taking me together in this forum, and I hope I can share from my experience about think tank, the role of think tank in Indonesia, and how to develop and build among region. Since yesterday, actually, we can see that the role of think tank is very important, which directly involve or indirectly, because in Indonesia, actually, when we talk about think tank institutions, not many. We can say, for example, Indonesian CSIS, SMERU, yes, they are think tank institutions, but like a LIPI university, actually not really think tank, because we have to produce also science and technology for the basic research, not only for the applied research. So I prefer put in science and technology institutions under governments. When we talk about science and technology institutions, actually we have three functions. The first function is science for science. The second function, science for community science. And the third is science for stakeholders. What does it mean? First, science for science means they should produce science and technology. Why I talk about technology also? Because in LIPI, actually there are 5 deputyship. First, social sciences and humanities. Second, natural sciences, marine sciences, earth sciences, technical sciences, and sciences services. All have their own function and their own research. But today we really try to synergy each other, because the new trend of Indonesians' approach mostly should be cross-discipline, because a lot of benefit in that area. When we talk about science for science, every science and technology for developing and or building a new innovations for science itself. In technology, they should from invention to patent. LIPI is the highest total of patent among research institutes in Indonesia. However, like yesterday from Malaya University said, only around 10% until commercializations. It's a very hard to make more than 10%. Why? Because there are some constraints and challenges in our policy in Indonesia. I will tell it later. Secondly, when we talk about science for scientific community, science should be built the network and collaborations. I agree with the speaker before. That network and collaborations is a very important. And usually we have to start from the individual or small team. Very hard directly institution to institution because depend on the issue of the problems that we rise. Taking the kind of network and collaboration usually in terms of high education, training, joint publications, joint research, seminar, or lecture. This is very common among scientists. Compared with the research by private institutions, mostly practical and for advocacy to the society or the government. But for the research institution like me, like us, LIPI sometimes have a difficulties directly influence. Why? Because we also government. So one experience that's a very good experience for us is when we have collaborations with Tsinghua University. We have here Dr. Christine from Research Center for Politics, working together with Tsinghua University under Dr. Christine. We make research with, we call Indonesian-Taiwan Economic Cooperation Arrangement. Is it feasible? It is a very hard time at the time because 2012 and 2013, I think. After it published, it is not directly our government can adopt. So we always talking with them. So not only track 2, but 1.5 track. We try to develop 1.5 track. And then after that, our governments, oh, this is very important for us. And you know, today we have continuing this research to develop this research more advanced, how to develop Indonesia and Taiwan cooperations. It is not easy because, you know, Indonesia follow one China policy, but we have to do that to show to the world that the cooperation not only from the political perspective, but we can develop economy, social, culture, and technology collaborations. And another thing is how to develop the collaborations. We also have some small collaborations with Taiwan, especially for the social culture, because it is very important to understand social culture each other. Thirdly, when we talk about science for stakeholders, it means that research should be able to directly address the issue of nations. Also hope that policy changes, patent technology up to the commercializations, and technology can be directly utilized community. It's a very important, but still challenges, because not really easy to push the government take the result of the research. Sometimes as a person or small team, usually we try to influence the governments. we have many experience in that area, especially when we talk about corruption in what we call party. So we have collaborations research with corruptions. KPK, we call it the KPK, and then we can influence to the government changing the policy directly. But again, 1.5 track. So if we only work on the second track or track 2, it's very hard to influence. So 1.5 track is very important for us to influence the governments. Actually, challenges is very complicated today. The system of R&D in Indonesia still need more improvement and independence because the funding mostly comes from the government. And one of the important chance is building collaborations among ASEAN countries. So I think the collaborations with Taiwan is one of the opportunity that we can have. Of course, in the commons and international issues, it will be more powerful, such as food security and safety, disaster management, and biodiversity. Why I raise this issue? Because actually Indonesia has already such a blueprint national research until 2045, but under President Jokowi, there is a special priority, so-called national priority. There are 10 national priority: education, health, housing and settlement, development of business and tourism, energy security, food security, poverty reduction, infrastructure, connectivity and maritime, regional development, and the last one, political law, defense, and security. It means also that as a research institute or university that under governments, that funding from the government should follow that program and give the solution. So today, more than 60% the result of the research should be really directly solve the problem to the government or the society. And in LIPI also we have a changing strategy. Synergy cross-discipline is one of the most important today, except some research not really cross-discipline, but some we have cross-discipline. For example, when we talk about the water, so it means not only politics of water or technology of water or economic of water, but we can give the solutions cross the discipline, and then we can give a comprehensive solution. Today, actually, if we talk about science and technology in Indonesia, become a vital factor, and we have many institutions in Indonesia. Scientific community organization in Indonesia has a great potential to develop. It is indicated from the higher educations of the sciences of the scientists, as well as the diverse field of the study existing in Indonesia. Unfortunately, the potential of Indonesian scientists are not partly capable in develop well in some institutions, but some institutions develop well. Mostly develop well in the big university and the national institution, but for the local institutions, it still need more development. I think I would like to conclude my presentations. I will jump to the conclusion. Capitalize the intellectual or scientists, government, university, or other many kind of research institute is a must, because when we talk about capitalize, it means also how to reduce the bureaucracy in Indonesia. bureaucratisasi in the research institute is very high today, and we have to reduce it because it's very hard to capitalize the intellectual or the scientists. Secondly, building network and collaborations among institutes in two regions, Southeast Asia and also South Asia, actually give a lot of benefit. We already show that's how very good benefit collaborations between Tsinghua University and also and LIPI, how to push Indonesian government and to push Taiwan government to make a good collaborations. While the experience from other countries can provide ideas, reference, this common vision of ASEAN must be developed in the context of ASEAN regionalism and harmonized development. There are many researchers has a good mobility to other institution development, but mostly individually, not institutionally. So it's one of the challenges that we have to make it become capitalized. Southeast Asia and South Asia have some similarity issues to the issue. There are many, but they have a different character. For example, what I say about the poverty, about disaster reduction, about water and many kind. When we can make a collaboration, I think we can learn each other and we can give solutions each other. I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. I'm sorry, I always pronounce wrong. Pudjiastuti, right?
You can call me Nuke.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think especially you mentioned about the Taiwan and Tsinghua Economic Research Institute and the LIPI's cooperation, how that can shape and also push the bilateral relationship and also all the policy development, and how this as a model, especially for the emerging Southeast Asia and South Asia think tank cooperation to improve the regional multilateral bilateral cooperation. I think that is some takeaway I really like. And also that also explains why Christy during the planning session insists that we should invite Dr. Nikki to our panel because then I understand that the deep cooperation between Tsinghua Research and Economic Research Institute and LIPI that has been paving all the important work. So next I'd like to invite Christy for some comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizer, Prospect Foundation, for inviting me to this very important session. I'm from Economic and Policy-Oriented Research Institute in Taiwan. In terms of collaboration between think tanks in this region, we have extensive exchanges and dialogues with think tanks, NGOs across Southeast Asian countries and also other countries. And LIPI actually is the first one that starts the ECA, Economic Cooperation Agreement Research with Taiwan. And thanks to LIPI, following that, we have already concluded a number of similar studies with other countries. And yesterday, we learned from President Tsai Ing-wen that Taiwan is committed to a long-term partnership with countries in this region. And if you read the new southbound policy and the guidelines and also the principles, you will find this long-term commitment actually are reflected by the midterm and long-term goals and objectives of the policy. And to achieve that, I hope the Yushan Forum will not be a one-time event, but will continue to serve as a platform for Taiwan and southbound countries and other like-minded countries, for example, the United States and Japan, to continue to exchange ideas and also to discuss timely issues in the region and exchange ideas. To address this theme of this issue, this session, also to demonstrate that we think tankers not just think, we also act. I would like to propose two following initiatives. The first idea is about the changing Asia and the currently restructuring of the global and regional supply chain. Starting from the 1980s, Taiwanese firms have invested and established industrial clusters and value chains which have covered industries such as textile and garments, footwear, bicycles, electronics, and auto parts across the Southeast Asia and China. And most of them are in collaboration with their local business partners and international clients. And starting from 2009, after the global financial crisis, we have witnessed an increasing number of Taiwanese firms or Taishang, the Taiwanese business people, relocate from China to Southeast Asia, and some to India. And this is actually one of the very basic economic factors behind the initiation of the new southbound policy proposed starting from last year. So we believe this global and regional value chains are undertaking a significant change, and that the Southeast Asia and India too are playing a more and more important role. And this is what I'm going to suggest. I suggest that the think tanks of Taiwan and southbound countries and also other like-minded countries create research consortiums to study the trend and how further partnership can be made by cross-country collaboration in industrial clusters and value chains, and to also cover issues how to better enable newcomers, including Myanmar and Cambodia, for example, and also Laos, to better participate in this emerging supply chain. And also since Taiwanese companies or Taishang or the Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce have already established well-organized networks in most of the Southeast Asian countries and also some Asian countries. I also suggest that we can also invite Taishang representatives to take part in the research consortium in order to reflect their business perspective and also to discuss, for example, the social corporate responsibility issues with them. And the second idea I'm going to suggest is that we can create a regional network to include think tanks, NGOs, business communities, university, and development agencies to do a stock-taking exercise of existing issues and challenges facing the region in further pursuing economic prosperity and social and democratic development. This network should take advantage of the most recent advancements of the ICT technology and also some of the emerging economic models such as shared economy and also the big data and the application of big data. For example, some people are talking about smart or online volunteer work or smart charity work. And so that this network can try to address and solve the development challenges in this region. And I look forward to this kind of brainstorming and further discussion following the Yushan, the first Yushan Forum, and we hope that we can contribute further to this network. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christy. Yeah, in addition to the traditional kind of research, you also sort of fall in line with Dr. Joshi's how the technology can help to transform the think tank management and the substance of the think tank working. Do I think about that the Uberization of think tank, as you suggest? Probably that's my wrong takeaway. But next, I would like to invite Dr. Chen Mumin, my good friend, to share with his thoughts. Thank you.
I have PowerPoint slides. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Glad to be here to join this panel. I think today is the topic of this panel is talk about think tank collaboration. So my presentation here will focus on how Taiwan think tanks cooperate with think tanks in Southeast Asia and South Asia. I have some experiences either visiting think tanks in both regions or receive scholars from those think tanks. Basically, I think there are two different ways of cooperation or dialogue between Taiwanese think tanks or scholars and the think tanks in either Southeast Asia or South Asia. The first kind of cooperation is conducted by think tanks from both sides. For instance, Prospect Foundation, the host of this forum, and Institute of International Relations, 政大国关中心, yeah, a think tank from NCCU, or CIER, China Chonghua Institute for Economic Research, are the most famous think tanks in Taiwan. Over the past few years, they have successfully built such cooperation with different countries, yeah, such as LIPI and ORF. This is a more institutionalized think tank cooperation. But there's another kind of cooperation that is individual scholars either visited or worked or try to build some dialogue between both sides. Actually, I consider myself more like the second kind. I visit different think tanks in both countries, and also I receive scholars from from these regions. Yeah, and these are more like individual based. Yeah, okay, but these are the basic two models. What I saw from these two kinds of cooperation, there are some problems. The first is that particularly the think tank to think tank cooperation, they need support from both sides. Yeah, as I know that many such dialogue, they were established and run a few years, but did not continue. Yeah, one of the very famous example is that the Taiwan-India dialogue, yeah, between IR and IDSA. Yeah, the reason they did not continue is for various reasons, but one of the reasons is that both sides they couldn't find incentive to continue. Yeah, yeah, and the second problems I found is that individual scholars. We don't, like me, yeah, we don't really have the resource. We don't have the mandate to either continue or to expand a dialogue, even if we successfully build some. But it's difficult because we don't have resource. Yeah, and I will explain later if we have time. The third problem I have seen is that on both sides, both kind of cooperation, actually, there are very, very small number of people got involved. Particularly in Taiwan, there's not many scholars working on Southeast Asia, and don't even mention the people working on South Asia. Yeah, so even we try to organize some seminar, conference, or dialogue, it's difficult to get more people interested. Yeah. And the last problem I've seen is sometimes a political factor also got involved. For instance, one time I got a chance to visit one country in South Asia, and I plan to visit their think tank. And they first agreed, but before I visit, they told me that my visit has to be canceled because I'm from Taiwan. Yeah, and well, such thing doesn't really happen very often, but occasionally, yeah, they saw that I probably represent government. I have some political, goal, but yeah, that's why it's difficult for, particularly for Taiwanese scholars or Taiwanese think tank to build a substantial cooperation. So what can we do? Okay. I provide 3 suggestions because now here is a rare opportunity that we have experts either working in think tanks or have a tremendous interest in in this area. I think first important thing is that we should have some networking. Yeah, Taiwan is too small, and we don't really have many think tanks, and we don't really have a think tank culture, not like India or Singapore. So I think what we can do is that we try to build a network among ourselves. Yeah, in Taiwan, different small or medium-sized think tanks, we could have some kind of alliance. And then we try to build an alliance or network with think tank abroad. Yeah. Let me make it more clear. For instance, it might be very difficult for Taiwan to have some cooperation with some individual country in Southeast Asia or South Asia. But if we could have a network, it would be much easier. Like India could also help us to build such a network and invite other think tanks from other South Asian countries and to have this kind of dialogue, yeah, between Taiwan and all South Asian countries. Yeah. And the second suggestion I have is that I think think tanks are from Taiwan side and also from from abroad. We have to explore and find some common interest or goals. What can we do? Because bilateral visit and we just have a kind of diplomatic kind of talk, it doesn't go anywhere. Yeah, and I know that many think tanks in Southeast Asia and in South Asia, you have joint projects. Yeah, with foreign countries, with foreign think tanks. Yeah, okay. I think this is a very good model, and I think Taiwan should learn. That is, first we have dialogue, and then we find a common interest. Then we try to have some projects and to implement, and then try to have some results. Yeah, for instance, China rising, security or economic order of East Asia. These are the I think areas or subjects I think I think both sides might be interested. The third suggestion I have is that we should find potential for expanding this kind of cooperation. That is how we can include, recruit, and attract more people, particularly young scholars. Here in Taiwan, young scholars, many of them are only committed to academic researches. They don't really get interested in policy-related studies. And so if we could, I think that, for instance, this Yushan Forum, and in the future, we could create a platform. And then this platform will allow and introduce some young, talented scholars, experts from Taiwan side and also from Southeast Asia and South Asia. Then we could do more. Yeah, not just research, not just networking, but we could find other areas with potential for future cooperation. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I hope these observations and suggestions will be very helpful for the panelists and also the audience. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Chen Mumin. And especially when you talk about the networking, this common interest, and also the other suggestions. I think that's very important. But also, you also highlight the problem. It's very unique in Taiwan. Probably other countries haven't been shared about this. That is the very much segregation about academic and the policy communities. So this is something that when Taiwan, we need to involve, and we need to really face this challenge. So the last but not the least, my good friend Alan Yang Hao, now it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, President Lai. I think I would like to use this opportunity to thank the Prospect Foundation for the kind support and also the very well-organized arrangement for this Yushan Forum, the first ever platform to promote, also jointly with the civil society group to promote the New Southbound policy in Taiwan and the region. Well, first of all, I would like to respond, Professor Chen mentioning that there is a collaboration between IIR and also IDSA in India. I happen to be affiliated with IIR for the past 9 years. So I think this is a very good chance to add up some more information that actually the channel between IIR and IDSA is not canceled, but in a occasional way to sustain and to manage, because one of our leading Indian expert, Professor Ravi, is returning back to India. So we are lacking of the human capacity to work on this one. Since I'm the last presenter and panelist, I would like to share some of my notes in sort of the wrapping up this session's discussion on how the regional and also Taiwanese think tank think to accumulate or to transnationalize the knowledge capital in Taiwan's new southbound policy. My turn to address on this is globalization. This is a multiple channel for us to rethink the role and capacity of the think tank in Taiwan and also in the region. So I would like to use the globalization to discuss the role of IIR as a domestic, very important policy think tank, and also the academic institution lasting for more than 64 years in Taiwan. And I happen to serve as the deputy director of this institute. And also our previous deputy director, Professor Ko, is over there to show the support of IIR to the Eastern Forum. And since last year in 2016, we installed a new Center for Southeast Asian Study in National Zhengzhi University, which is in partnership with the same Center for Southeast Asian Study in Kyoto University in Japan. I would say that this is a new initiative for Taiwan's academic institute and also the think tank to collaborate with our regional counterpart, not only limited in southbound area, I mean the Southeast Asian country, but also with the East Asian countries in partnership with their think tank, with their academic institute to collaborate in drafting the blueprint of training and nourishing the young leaders. So I would say this is the first thing that I would like to share. I personally affiliated with 2 institutes. One is IIR, and the second one is the newly established Center for Southeast Asian Study. I only have 2 slides because there's only 8 minutes to 10 minutes, so I probably will use this time to explain my thinking, my thoughts. I would say that during the past years, both IIR and Center for Southeast Asian Study adopt 3 P approach to highlight what we have been doing for enhancing the collaboration among the institutional connectivity between Taiwan and also the Asia-Pacific think tank. The first one is people. Actually, this is more highlighted by the Center for Southeast Asian Study. We jointly nourish young scholar and epistemic community with our regional counterpart. As I mentioned, this institution has been established with the Kyoto counterpart since its establishment. And also we facilitate some regional training program and convention for the young scholar of Southeast Asian study in Asia. We call that ASEA. This is under the framework of the Consortium of Southeast Asian Study in Asia, also led by Kyoto University's Center for Southeast Asian Study, with other important and leading think tank and also academic institutions, including the ARI in National University of Singapore and also the Chulalongkorn University's Asian Research Institute. So this is the way we think that to localize our capacity and, as a think tank or as a academic institution, we have a duty and responsibility to train and to nourish the people, the young generation. And in this year, the forthcoming November, we are going to have another workshop for training the young scholar. Actually, this young scholar training program is not limited in Taiwan or in Japan, but also open to East Asian, Southeast Asian, and South Asian scholar, student, undergraduate, postgraduate, and even the new and fresh PhD. So this is a way we try to collaborate with our counterpart to promote the capacity building initiative in this young generation. And aside from that, since we are the secretary of the CSCAP participatory group in Taiwan, we facilitate the ASEAN, ISIS, and IR dialogue and engagement to invite more young faces and young policy community to visit Taiwan, to visit the government unit, to learn from what we have been doing for the last decades, and even for a more recent initiative. So this is the localize the people training program. Secondly, I think it's related to the regional setting, which is the perspective, the second P. What IIR and CSAS has been doing is to identify common issue. And this common issue is in the context of the community of development in Asia and beyond. In order to identify this regional awareness and to create the identity among the policy expert and also the young scholar, that will be a very important move and practice for pushing forward the joint effort for the joint perspective. So the bilateral and regional dialogue is very important to the nourishing of this joint perspective. I do believe that Yushan Forum today provide a multilateral setting for the learning from each other on the perspective, not only in Taiwan, but also share with our South and Southeast Asian counterpart. And also we conduct some research projects through the institutional settings with our regional counterpart to work on even southbound policy or Taiwan-ASEAN relation in terms of economic integration or political security challenge within. So this is the second level of my turn, the globalization of the think tank's role. The third one is, I would like to echo the main theme of the Yushan Forum today, that is the opportunity mentioned by Chairperson Chen. The opportunity is, in terms of the think tank collaboration, that will refer to the facilitating of the solid institutional connectivity among Taiwan, regional country, and global institution. Well, we are very pleased to be included as one of the institutional membership of the consortium of Southeast Asian study in Asia. So this is the way we just like our partner, our counterpart in Taiwan, the think tank, to be included in a multilateral setting, the consortium in the region in different issue area. And that will be the way to highlight Taiwan's contribution through the institutional efforts. And one thing to share is our Ministry of Education. Well, during the past years, the Ministry of Education has supported different projects at locality to invite the university to participate in the Education South World policy, especially to set up the new format of Taiwan Connection and also the resource center for the Southeast Asia cultural, social, and economic research. That will be an information and resource center at Southeast Asian and South Asian locality to work together with the research program, university, and even the business council in the region. So that will be a very important example to practice the opportunity in the region. I think my point is the success of New Southbound policy is not only building up a better Taiwan and a better Taiwan-ASEAN relation, but also to contribute to the regional community as well. So I would like to conclude some of my, idea through this slide. Young scholar nourishing is one of our key move in a blueprint. That will be some kind of the basis for the building block project among the so-called think tank collaboration in the context of new southbound policy. Only if the young scholar can be cultivated and to be trained in the context to tackle with the development need in the region for the regional community, we can really realize the community building project among think tankers and policy makers. And then the networking among think tanks, as our previous panelists mentioned and addressed, can be enhanced. That will result in the policy illumination to the government and also to our enterprise. So based upon this approach, well, I do look forward to a more solid institutional institutional connectivity between Taiwan, regional counterpart, and the global institution. So I would say that if I may, the next step for the opportunity will be addressed. I think there are three things. The first one is the common interest in strategic survival in geopolitical and also geoeconomic dynamics, and importantly, among the major power competition in Asia and beyond. The secondly is it's important to tackle with the common challenge from within, for example, the political, economic, and social transformation and national development project, just like what ASEAN has mentioned to promote from 2016 to 2025, the master plan, the second phase of master plan of ASEAN connectivity. And the third one is the common task in the region, such as the social transformation, in line with the regional integration in terms of the trade and also the investment. I would say that in the past, it's easy to address why Taiwan matter. But now it's quite difficult to practice and to convince our partner how Taiwan matter. And from now on, we do believe that it's important for our think tanker, and also the epistemic community to jointly work out the blueprint and the forthcoming project to convince and invite our partner in the region to justify how Taiwan matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan Yang, for your suggestion, and especially about the development for the Yushan Forum. That probably for the next years or the year after that, what will be the focus? And I think today all of us talk about the importance of networking and the importance of having common research interest, because the think tank itself is an intellectual enterprise. And basically that highlights the importance of to harness and broaden the human capital in order to build the substance, and so that the intellectual capital can accumulate and continue to develop. And right now I will just open to the floor. I know there are a lot of the academics and people who would like to, okay, first over there. And please identify yourself, and then our honorable former Vice Premier Hume.
Former TV journalist Liao Ling. I have two questions for the gentleman from Myanmar. The first one is, we are here in Taiwan really concerned about Rohingya crisis. So I'm really wondering to hear your view as an intellectual from Myanmar. And the second one is, not only Taiwan, also a lot of countries are really interested in investment in Myanmar. So could you share with us what's the opportunities and risks right now in Myanmar in terms of infrastructure and investment? Thank you.
And then I'd like to invite
Thank you very much. First of all, congratulations on the excellent views of all the panelists. Actually, I don't have any question, but I'd like to make one observation. As a former president of Korea Development Institute, there is no one-size-fits-all policies among countries, but there might be some commonality among the, I think, think tanks too. So I think that I'm very sympathetic to think tank people because I think that the most stressful jobs in the world is the think tank people. They should think like policymaker. They should analyze like a professor. They should write like pen journalist. They should communicate like a diplomat. And also they should manage think tank like a businessman. I think that it is terrible jobs. But the implication is that there might be some kind of some balance of these functions. That's the first point. Another one is that, as my friend that Mr. Joshi mentioned that, apart from the technological changes, there might be some kind of drastic change of the role of think tanks. In other words, I think that something like a think tank should be changed, maybe think and do tank. In other words, you'd better to focus on the implementation rather than just the tossing of the idea. So how you make some suggestions on the implementation of the policies, etc., etc. Okay, and also there might be some kind of set up the priorities of researches. You are focusing on the short-run issues, or you are focusing on long-run issues, or something like domestic issues versus international, etc., etc. So in that sense, there should be, maybe I'm too much pessimistic, but there should be some kind of big changes in the area of professionals, like think tanks, right? So this is my observation. But if you have any response, that I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Mr. Hyun. Yeah, I think your experience in running the think tank, especially the resource budgets and how to raise the money, that's the nightmare for everybody. And the issue about how to find the research topic, as well as how to make it relevant to the policy and to have an impact. I think that also has been the perpetual issues for every think tankers. For the think tank who has been directly under the governmental control, usually their impact to the policy will be more direct, but they cannot ask the question why. They can question the issue about how. Yeah, so I think that serves all of us to, or anyone here would like to add on that? And then, do you want to answer the questions? Or, no, I'm not forcing you, yeah.
So let me address the easier question, which is the investment question. So the regulatory space after the democratic transition has become more and more conducive to foreign investment. We had a number of legal structure that come into place. One is the Myanmar investment law. It's a merger between foreign investment law and Myanmar citizenship law into one consistent, coherent legal framework governing both investment, both foreign investment and domestic investment. So that's one positive development. Second is the company law, which is currently in Parliament. It's also another progressive law that's sort of looking at less restrictive investment regime or company structure for foreigners to have sort of a presence in the country. So we also developing the competition law, which will also look into sort of a structure of monopolies and rent seeking within the economy. So these are sort of a regulatory development that are conducive to more investment. On the issue in Rakhine, I think. So the reason I was talking about the role of the military in the government is because I think the conflict has been very endemic in the space of body politics in Myanmar. It's a country that has been ridden with civil conflict for the 60 years, and it's a space that governed and immersed in violence, right? So there's a lot of displaced person, not just in Rakhine. It's also hundreds and thousands of displaced person in minority regions in Kachin, Shan, and Karen. So they're all sort of, I think we need to have a more broader perspective on the manifestation of a problem, whether there's sort of a symptom of a larger political issues. So I think we need to have a more envision, a more long-term and sustainable approach to resolving resolution between different ethnicity, and the notion of citizenship, and moving away from more ethnically defined citizenship to more civic citizenship. I think that's the direction that we can all move towards.
Okay, next, any other questions? Hey, please, gentleman over there.
Hello, I'm Roger Liu. I'm a Taiwanese American from Indian University, called Flem University in Pune, Maharashtra, India. And I got an idea just inspired by Dr. Chen and Dr. Yan about the role that the younger generation can play in think tank. And I think nowadays we're talking about important ideas like student-centered education. And I think students, even the undergraduate students, can play a much more important role in think tank. Well, I want to give 2 examples that I have had in India. Well, the Indian students are very versatile than I have thought. So one of the programs is that in the university I'm working for right now, we have a Discovering India program. The students will be assigned, or they will come up with their own research project, and they will be led by teachers to travel to different places in India. And after that, they have to share their research results in conferences. And the other thing is that one of my colleagues just created, she's a Brazilian, and she created a think tank which involved a lot of her students. So the students have to compile the newsletters, they have to organize meetings, and they have to brief their results to think tanks in New Delhi. So I think, well, maybe it's a new idea that we can think about to get more students and younger generations involved, which can actually address the issue that Dr. Chen and Dr. Yang have brought. Thank you very much.
Dr. Chen, you want to answer the question or respond to the comment about Taiwanese American India? Yeah, sure. Joshi?
That's a great suggestion. I'd just like to share that the Observer Research Foundation runs a Young Leaders Forum, like they do here. But what we try to do is, once we've created the forum, we try to keep it perpetual. So we get about 50 young leaders every year from across the world, every institute, and we now have an alumni which is over 1,700, spread across 125 countries. And we keep them connected through all kinds of social media devices and get them back for our programs. And they come as speakers many times. They do not come just as participants. They come as speakers, they create panels of their own, they choose topics of their own, and we get them to interact with ambassadors, ministers, right on the platform, and they have very, very relevant questions. Until think tanks stay connected with the millennial generation, we're going to be losing out. That has to be done all the time.
All right, Derek?
A couple things, maybe extending on this remark on youth, and I know the next session is about young people, and there'll be discussion of probably these networks, but anticipating that conversation, if you wanted, when I was in the Obama administration, if you wanted to make President Obama happy, put him in front of young people. He had something called the Young Southeast Asia Leadership Initiative called YSEALI, where he would go to every ASEAN year, he'd go out to a different Southeast Asian country, and he'd meet with young people, and he'd take off his jacket and loosen his tie, and he'd take questions, and he just loved it. And he now has the Obama Foundation that's going to build on this. They're doing something in a couple weeks in Chicago with young people around the world. So I don't know what will be discussed next session or what Taiwan can do, but Taiwan being part of that kind of networking of young people, of women, is another way to do this. Because, as mentioned earlier, women are going to be essential to the development of the region, or growing importance within the cultures of these societies. I would certainly encourage that. On Minister Hyun's comment, and I may be interpreting it wrong, but it gets to a foundational issue that we haven't really addressed. We kind of tiptoe around here, which is what are we trying to achieve in trying to have think tank cooperation? I mean, what is it? What are our expectations for it? What is the definition of success? And then that's the way you decide what are the priorities. What are the prioritized areas? We can do all kinds of things in the think tank realm, and you can have all kinds of conversations of various types. But what are you seeking to achieve ultimately with this policy at the end of the day, and how do you declare the policy a success? Or this component, the think tank cooperation component, a success? I think in and of itself, it's important for Taiwan people to be out there and for Taiwan to have its name associated with initiatives in the region. That in and of itself is important. But it also is probably important not just to do, you talk about a do tank versus a think tank, but also how do you leave a footprint behind? Not just do and then go. How do you make an impact, or how do you maintain some kind of residue? Footprint is what we call it, behind in some fashion, because that's important for any place. So thinking strategically about that aspect, as well as the broader importance of getting out there, is something we haven't really discussed, but will be something very important for Taiwan to think about.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very important point. So the so-called cooperation think tank or the gathering should not be just social gathering. And I think probably that's the most important takeaway that I have. Okay, another comments or questions, whether that's on the podium or from the audience? Okay, if none, I will just, yeah, wait, Josh?
Just one comment on something which Christy said, which is a very important factor about what she was talking about, was global value chains and the restructuring of global value chains, which is very much part of the new southbound policy. Taking that further, we are at a time, and this is a big question which is arising and being raised all over South Asia, all countries which are, in a way, demographically threatened. There are certain countries which are demographically challenged, countries like Taiwan, Japan, Sweden, with the populations which are the young population declining. The countries which are demographically threatened, I would put all of West Asia. I would put countries like India, large tracts of Southeast Asia, where there is a real challenge as to how do you keep on creating and keep on generating the necessary growth to create jobs. And frankly, countries like India today talk about Make in India. It's a big program. For that matter, Make in America is a big program today as well, because yes, jobs have become critical. And the threat which arises is that probably the age of export-led manufacturing, which created all the jobs for the last 20, 25 years in China, that solution is no longer available. The time for that is gone. But where global supply chains make a difference is that you are now getting into an age of distributed manufacturing, where manufacturing is definitely going to move into where the markets are. And that is where the advantages lie for countries in South Asia. More and more manufacturing moves there, probably does not create as many jobs in manufacturing per se. See, so far we've been only talking about manufacturing. The point is jobs are going to be created somewhere else. Probably they're going to be, because if you're going to be getting into distributed manufacturing in the supply chains, in the new supply chains, then the jobs are going to be created in local value generation. How do you customize products? The age you're coming into is kind of mass customization, customized to each specific market. So we need to work, especially with institutes like Katie's, as to how to find answers to these solutions. And I think there's a very good partnership possible over here. There is immense possibility in doing this, in breaking up the supply chains. It is going to be happening. And probably the new jobs which are going to be created are going to be in design rather than actual manufacturing, in localizing content. There's a huge demand for local content. So these are the actual conversations which you need to have with technology companies here.
Yeah, thank you, Joshi. Probably you are also mentioning another important element, that is, when we talk about think tank cooperation or the project, it's not just about the think tank among intellectuals. You also need to involve the intellectuals and the people doing the real work, whether that's in the private sectors or in industrial engineer as well, technology, people who are doing the tech, how we can build out the platform for that, for those, the cross-disciplinary and also cross-sectorial development. That probably will be the think tank, how the role the think tank can evolve and have the contributions. Then, any other questions? Guys, gals? No? All right, then I will just ask all our panelists to say their conclusion words. First, start from Alan Yang.
Well, I think I don't have much to say, but I would like to share some of my notes for the new role of think tank. Actually, the role of think tank and capacity of think tank is not limited to speak to the government or to the policy community, but also to spread the influence to society. Facing to social context is very important. And by using the technology, I think CSIs play a very important role to visualize some key issue on the internet and share with the internet generation. So I think that become a very good example for our think tankers to think about. Maybe we can follow this kind of a new mechanism or new initiative. Thank you.
Christy?
I think Taiwan has established a bilateral research collaboration with most of the countries in the region. However, I think it's time to expand the bilateral research collaboration into a regional or multinational collaboration to discuss issues such as the changing of the global supply chain, also the new version or the emerging, a new style of this globalization, also liberalization. I think for that, I expect the Yushan Forum or the new established foundation play a leading role in the future. Thank you.
All right, Mr.
So I believe the role of the think tank is a function of its location and the development and political trajectory of the nation. So I think the liberalization ideas and liberalization of values, I think is very important. I think the role of think tank can play in emergence of a deliberative democracy. So just responding to the earlier question, between 1948 and between 1962, we had a democratic elected government. And at that government, in the cabinet, there were 3 Muslim cabinet ministers. A lot of other minorities were also present in the cabinet. So we used to have this very exclusive political dynamics in the democratic government. I think the role of our new think tanks or thinkers, intellectual in Myanmar is to bring back these democratic institutions in the country so that we have a more inclusive society.
Emmers?
When it comes to think tank collaboration, I think we need to look at it as a means to an end. And so it's important to keep in mind what the end goal is. We shouldn't meet just for the sake of meeting on an annual basis and so on, as sometimes exists between think tanks. There is a memorandum of understanding which was signed at some point that every year in July we should meet as 2 individual institutions. And sometimes you can lose track of why you're meeting. And I think to come back to what Ambassador Mitchell was saying, what is the end goal, what's the objective is something that should drive any kind of think tank collaboration.
Derek?
Just one more theme. The other pillar I know for President Tsai's administration is a so-called Asian Silicon Valley. And I wonder if there's more that can be done, if that's a goal, strategic goal for Taiwan. The IT sector, as Sunjoy has suggested, is a priority here. It's something that distinguishes Taiwan. How do you connect those two, both the Asian Silicon Valley and the new southbound, to deal with some of the really tough questions, not just of new technologies and what they mean for us, but also the ethics of new technologies and how do you regulate them?
Thank you. Joshi?
Well, all I'll say is that think tanks don't have the luxury of doing research for the sake of research. We will and always will be in the public space. So wherever the public space is, we need to get into that. whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Facebook, wherever the public space evolves. Tomorrow it may be somewhere completely else. So we have to be fleet-footed and kind of move on, taking advantage of whatever formats are created over there. But our research has to be ultimately, the core of the research has to be fundamentally deep. And the long form, which is our staple diet, will always remain. It can draw people into the long form through the various platforms that we use, but that remains what we do.
Right, Dr. Nuke?
Yeah, I have 2 points. One is think tank collaboration should be give benefit on both sides. I mean, not only that give the funding, but also with the government or the institution in other countries should get the benefit. Secondly, is cross-sector and cross-discipline is still challenges, I think, today, but it's important to give space because from my experience with forced migration that my specialists, we have some meeting 1.5 track. We can get different perspective, different point that make a good solution for that area. Thank you.
Moment. Yeah. I think the broader theme of this forum is to see how Taiwan could build connectivity with Southeast and South Asian countries. I think the first step is to find a common interest between Taiwan and these countries. And the think tank cooperation, I think it will be a very, very important tool and a strategy we could use. Okay, so I think today's forum will be the beginning for us to do something like this in future. Thank you.
Thank you. That will conclude our session, and deeply apologize for being dragging too long and too late. But really thank for all the panelists for giving us very fruitful discussion. So let's give them a big applause.